Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another review. So this time I'd like to talk about the Schiit Gungnir Multibit DAC, and I would like to just take as much time as I need for this review to tell you guys about this DAC, because I do think that if somebody's considering this, if one of you is considering this, it retails for $1,250 in the US, so you might want to know the details before you buy one, you know? So that's my excuse for no editing and using the old-fashioned method. And I'm going to implement some storytelling in my journey with this DAC and what this DAC has taught me and what this DAC represents for my very cringily titled hi-fi journey, if you will. So, if you remember about, I think almost exactly a year ago, I reviewed the Delta Sigma Gungnir on my channel. This is the exact same chassis as that. The difference is the internal, what's inside. So I made excuses for the longest time when it came to the upgrade of the Gungnir Multibit. I didn't think that I needed it. Basically, I said to myself, I don't need this, man. I have a Delta Sigma Gungnir, that's enough for me. Great detail reproduction, best that I've heard yet in anything that I've had at the time. But I didn't want to jump to multibits because the upgrade cost it might have gone up since then because of Brexit and other considerations, but it was £485 at the time, I believe. So I looked at that price and I thought, no way. You know, even though I did buy this used, I bought the Gungnir used from a guy in some Eastern European country off of HeadFi. What made me change my mind, however, later in the same year, last year, I went to Audio Sanctuary, which is my local hi-fi store, and I plugged in the Focal Illyr, which I had at the time and was very, very familiar with sound-wise. I plugged it into their Chord Dave, which is a DAC which is so far out of my price range, even used, that I would not even consider buying it. But I wanted to hear how it made my Illyr sound. And I was very surprised because suddenly all the details that I was hearing with the Gungnir were superseded. And it was done in a manner that I would say sounded very natural and not tilted in the treble in any manner. In my Gungnir review, I might have mentioned to you viewers that I said that the Gungnir it just pushes detail out at you in a relentless pace. It has a certain character to it, which it was just very aggressive. And someone told me later on, way later on, after I'd heard the Dave, and I was sitting around thinking, why does the Dave sound so relaxed in its presentation? It doesn't sound like it's trying to kill me with detail. It has natural detail reproduction. Why does this DAC not do that? Then somebody told me, they said, the Delta Sigma Gungnir has something called digititis in the treble. When I first heard that term, I thought, what the hell is that? Well, basically what it means is that it has a very digital sound to the treble. It has a bit of a hardness to the treble, which doesn't sound natural, I guess. It doesn't sound very relieving. It doesn't sound like it's effortless in its reproduction of detail. That certain hardness of the treble was another reason why I preferred the HD800 with the Gumby, which is what I'm going to be calling this from now on. Gungnir Multibit Gumby, it's known as that online as well. That's another reason why I preferred the Gumby for the HD800 rather than the Delta Sigma Gungnir. So I scrounged up some money, sent this on its way, sent it to the Schiit EU, and then Mark over at Schiit EU called me about 2 days later saying, there is a Coke spill inside your Gungnir. And I was like, wait, what? A Coke spill inside my Gungnir? he said, yeah, this thing looks damaged. I don't think I can upgrade it. And I was so disheartened because first of all, I don't drink Coke. So I don't know how that happened. But I guess out of annoyance at the time, I went and contacted the original seller on Headfire, and I said, yo, you sold me almost 8 months ago, you sold me a Gungnir with a Coke spill in it. What the hell, man? But he said that it couldn't have been him because he had a Mjolnir over it. So I don't know what the truth is, but I was pretty annoyed at the time. And the reason that there was a Coke spill was because these vents used to be open. When this was a Gungnir Delta Sigma, these vents used to actually look inside and you could see the circuits and the board and everything. No longer the case. So I have to give a big shout out to Mark at Schiit EU for being able to upgrade this board. He did have a bit of difficulty, but he persevered, and he told me that he probably won't ever do it again for anybody because of the amount of work involved, so I'm grateful to him for that. But he did manage to upgrade this to the Gungnir Multibit. Took way longer than usual, but it happened, and I was very happy because not only did I put a lot of money into it and I had my hopes up, but I had been using the own S6 DAC for a long time at that point, so I was really missing. Not only was I expecting what the Gungnir Multibit could be, I was also missing my Delta Sigma Gungnir at the time. So when I got this back, it was just, I was really, really happy about that. So the first thing what happened was when I plugged it in. I had heard from the same group of people over on Discord that the multi-bit versions of Schiit's DACs, I guess further than the Modi multi-bit, I guess maybe only the Gumby and then the Yggdrasil, which is their top of the line one. Basically, they say you have to give them time to not burn in, but warm up. I found that very unusual for a DAC. Why would you need to warm up? I talked to Mark later on at Headroom, and he told me it's something to do with output stage. And the Gumby could take maybe just conservatively maybe a day. Some people say a few days to warm up properly, so you should always just leave it on. And that is what I've been doing. I have left this on all the time since I bought it. This has been lying in my room all the time. It's been on. The first time I've unplugged it since I got it back in, I think, early February, was to do this review. And it's still a bit warm to the touch. So it can get pretty warm, and I was surprised when I saw that he had plugged up the holes. At first I thought, that's a bit unusual. Did he do that because he thought this guy can't handle his Coke, so he just plugged up the holes? But no, it's not like that. What happened, I compared it to a friend of mine who had a Gumby, and he had his plugged up as well. Basically, I guess airflow is not really a prime concern with the Gumby. It does get quite warm though. The chassis, it does get quite warm. It doesn't get hot to the point where you think this is a tube amp or something like that, but it can get pretty warm. So I plugged it in, listened to it for a while. I was immediately hit, even with a cold Gungnir, I was immediately hit with just an obscene amount of just an obscene upgrade from the own S6 that I was using at the time, which is an AK4495 Delta Sigma chip. I heard that natural reproduction of detail. I heard an emphasis in the mid-range, which was very, very sweet, but it was also very, very layered. And I heard overall there was quite a dynamic sound as well. And the treble, most importantly, did not seem harsh to me anymore. It did not seem like it was spiked. It didn't seem like it was the digital sound. But I'll get to sound in a minute. Let me just talk about it. I've spent a long time being lazy, not picking these up. So let me just talk about it really quick. So on the front, you can see it just says Gungnir right there. Same old chassis, different camera. So this is these are input selectors. This is not a power button. The power button's on the back. It's not even a button. It's a switch. So what you'll have here is an input selector, and you have USB, optical in, which I've been using, coaxial, and AES, I believe, and of course the on-off button. So, and as with all Schiit products, These use white LEDs, which are very bright. So if you have this on your desk, I know some people like to blot them out a bit or try to use something to dim them a bit, because they do get pretty bright. But I have it on the side, so I don't really care. Input selector, fairly fast. I've heard that the Yggdrasil does take a while. So on the back, you can see what it has. So there's a sticker that they put on when you upgrade to multibit, or if you have a multibit version. You have two SE outs. You have a balance out, which I've been primarily using with my Audio GD NFB28 amp section for the preamp for my monitors. And of course you have, this is the European version, so it has to be according. And here you have the inputs. Now the thing I want to talk about inputs really quickly, nothing about this review is quickly, but I was using the USB input, right? So the original Delta Sigma that I had, it had an upgrade to it. Now the thing about Schiit's DACs are upwards of the MIMBI, Modi Multibit, or Modi in general, they do have the tendency to be upgraded by Schiit. Now Schiit say you have to send them in for this. You can't do it by yourself. I don't know if you have to be a super high level electrical engineer to do this kind of thing. I certainly am not, so I'm not even going to do it. Like, look, it gives you a warning right here saying, caution, risk of electrical shock, do not open. So I'm not even going to try, but you can buy the boards on their own, and yeah. But the Electromod, meaning Mark, who I sent this to over on Schiit EU, the UK reseller, he has electrical engineering background, so he was able to do it for me. So you can basically upgrade these DACs as you see fit. But this had USB Type 2 an upgrade already, which is about, I think, £100 or $100 to upgrade to that. So my Delta Sigma one did have that. I was using the USB quite happily. Then somebody told me, as often happens in audio when you discuss things with other people, if you don't live in your own little bubble like I used to, people will tell you things and it'll get you curious. I was curious about this regard. Sorry about that, I had to switch out the battery of the camera. So, what I had heard from somebody online was that I should not use the USB input, which seemed very strange to me because of the USB Type 2 upgrade, version 2 upgrade. So at first I thought, why would I not want to use something to, as it's supposed to? USB is so convenient. So for the first time, I had to try and use the SPDIF input of any DAC that I've had. But I did hear a difference. The difference was in terms of the liveliness of the sound. Now, the Gumby is a very lively DAC. Absolutely. It has a very nice punch to it. It has a very nice depth to the sound. And I do think, maybe slightly, I can't quantify it obviously, I can't measure it either, but I do think that using the USB input does make it sound a little flatter than using SPDIF input. In which case I've been using the optical SPDIF. I don't have any way I can use the coaxial one because I don't have a sound card where I can put it in. I don't have a desktop computer where I can put in a sound card to enable this, so I've just been using the optical in. But I did hear a difference, so much so that I did not want to go back to using USB. But the disadvantage is, first, you have to understand that when you're using a DAC like this, you're going to have to get used to the clicks. The muting relay on this goes haywire all the time, no matter. It's lessened when you're using USB, but if you're using SPDIF, it can go nuts. Even if you track in the same song file that you're listening to, it can go haywire. There is a software which can help with this, where basically what happens is when you're sending bits to your DAC, it keeps like I said, it keeps muting itself when it feels like it's not getting any information. There is a small software, freeware, where you can basically tell your Gungnir that it's always in use, so then it won't do that anymore. It'll just keep it as a constant. It won't click anymore. And I have been using that. I found it very useful. I think thanks to Pork Fiend or Pork Fried over on Discord, thanks to him for that advice. So, livelier sound, had to use SPDI from now on. Couldn't go back to USB. The sound of the Gumby is so rich, it's just so tonally accurate when it comes to acoustic guitars, when it comes to all the music that I listen to, and the separation is stellar. It definitely was an upgrade over the Delta Sigma version, which I felt sounded a bit cold and harsh in the treble area. It still had very nice separation, but this took it to another level. I was immediately proven wrong for being stingy and waiting for my upgrade. I should have done it earlier, I guess, but eventually I got there, so I'm glad, because this could be the end game of many people. Many people. This DAC, depending on what your opinion on DACs are in the first place, I do believe some people say that any DAC worth its salt should be transparent. Not the case. This has a sound characteristic to it, which I'll get to in a minute, but definitely a very inviting sound. A sound which I definitely made me enjoy my H1800 more, because it became a lot less sibilant to me personally because of this DAC. Because there was something going on with the treble in the Delta Sigma version that was giving me pain compared to when I used it with this. Much less painful. So, win, right? I had a win. I upgraded my DAC, loved the sound, but it's not what you would call transparent. I don't like using that word, but I have to mention it has a certain tilt to warmth. This is a bit of a warm DAC. Now, the Dave is also slightly warm compared to many Delta Sigma DACs that I've heard, especially the Sabre ones. Holy crap! But there has to be. This is warmer than that. And you will definitely hear that if you are listening to genres of music which would benefit from a colder source or a brighter source. So you need to make sure, if you are using the Gumby and you're using something like, let's say, the Cavalli Liquid Carbon that I used to have, the pairing of the two will sound very nice on several headphones. Like, let's say the HT800 sounded amazing on that, but it would sound very stuffy on something like the ZMF Atticus, which is a very warm headphone. Warmest headphone that I currently own. So that's a good example of a pairing that I just can't stand. So there's that consideration to make. This has a warm tilt to the sound. It also is not as dynamic as the DAC on my Audio GD NFB28. Now, in terms of dynamics, I mean that it doesn't have the same level of once again, that DAC has a little bit of that treble, slight harshness to it, which I honestly don't really like anymore. So I can't really listen to that DAC anymore. But I'll admit that it has more slam to the sound, more bass slam, more impact to it, which I know some people definitely appreciate over the slightly softer tone of the Gumby. Now, I believe that the Gumby's layering is far better than the Auto GD DAC. I believe that the Gumby's sense of realism in the tone of instruments is also far better than the Auto GD DAC. But I can't take away the fact that if you're listening to something and you want that really aggressive sound, you really want that sound which every single note, you want it to sparkle on you. Sparkle at you, I guess. You want to hear that really sparkling sound when you're listening to acoustic guitars on the high notes, then you probably will enjoy the Audio GD Sabre DAC tuning more than the Gumby, which is just slightly rolled off in that regard. But that doesn't bother me so much, because what I do is I pair this, these days primarily I pair this with the amp section of the NFB28, which I find to be quite neutral, and also my Schiit Gungnir, which benefits heavily from the Gumby, because that thing is a little monster when it comes to dynamics, and definitely takes the details of the Gumby and takes it upon itself to add that slam, add that impact, and a bit of the sparkle up top depending on what tubes you use. So I do think I have the best of both worlds when it comes to my amps, the two amps that I have right now. So that doesn't bother me so much. I can't switch back to the NFB28 DAC. I'm going to review that too in the future. And I do think that when I'm listening to that DAC after listening to this for a while, I do get the sense that I'm missing a lot of the tonality that I love with the Gumby is out the window when I'm listening to that. And that does bother me. It bothers me more than it should as someone who tries to be professional. I can't do it for more than a few hours. I have to relapse and listen to the Gumby again. That's how much I love how this sounds. But what I just talked about warmth, well, their top of the line DAC, the Yggdrasil, that is not a warm DAC. That is actually something which I would call quite cold. And when I heard it for about 20 minutes over at Headroom on the Schiit and / Mr. Speaker's booth, I found that DAC had so much realism to the sound. So much realism, but not in a manner which was warm like this. It was harsher in the treble, but not in a very digital way, but just in a presentation way. Like it said, okay, I'm just going to present you with all this fabulous micro detail, but I'm not going to coddle you with the warmth, the warmth of the Gumby. This is going to be a more clinical sound. That's the term I was looking for right now when I was waffling. Clinical. That is a more clinical DAC. That is the HT800 level of clinical, whatever. It's like an HT800 compared to this, which is a more, can't think of a headphone right now, but this is warmer. This has a more inviting, sound. That also sounds very natural, but it has that clinical presentation, which is definitely harsh for many people. So I need to spend more time with Yggdrasil someday. But I do have to admit, I found the Yggdrasil immediately impressive, just like I found the Gumby immediately impressive. I did not get that sense from the Cord Dave, which is not multi-bit or anything like that, but is a very expensive top of the line DAC. It took me a while to warm up to the Dave, and I definitely needed to use it with an amplifier that I liked, which is, I'll talk about that in another review. It's a Skull amp, for me to appreciate what the Dave can do. But on its own, the Dave, out of its rather weak output, headphone jack output, I didn't like it so much. It didn't hit me the impact didn't hit me that this is a very nice DAC compared to the Gumby or the Yggdrasil. The Yggdrasil I thought was immediately good. I listened to it with the new Mr. Speaker's Eon, and I listened to it with, even with my VE Zen, which I took with me. It was just great. It was plugged into a Jotunheim, and I listened to it on that, and I thought, wow, this is really, really nice. Maybe I can dream about that someday, but that is first of all, the form factor of the Yggdrasil is way bigger than even this huge Gumby that you're looking at in front of you. This is the size of a DVD player. That's the size of like an old VCR, even bigger in fact. And the warm-up time on the Yggdrasil is about a week, they say. So, yeah. But it's a nice thing to look up to, and just like every other Schiit DAC, past a certain price, that will also be upgradable to whatever comes next. But I have to praise the Gumby for what I believe it does for the price. Now, keep in mind, of course, I bought mine used and then upgraded it, so I still got it cheaper than what you would get for it new. But even if you do buy it new, I have heard from people. I can't confirm this because I haven't heard the Theta DACs. I haven't heard all the other R2R DAC. R2R meaning multibit, I guess, in some other form. I haven't heard them all, so I can't compare them. But I do think that what this produces is so far beyond any Delta Sigma DAC, except for the Dave. Sorry, I believe that this sounds so much nicer than so many Delta Sigma DACs that I've heard. I heard the Hugo TT by Cord, which is far more expensive than this, and I do think this sounds better to me, which is something I have to A-B. I can't really A-B them because I don't own that, but I have to listen to it more. But I do think that this is more impressive to my ears than the Hugo TT. So I've been rambling for so long in this review, talking about my story about this DAC. But yeah, basically, I'm very happy to have this. And I didn't want to unplug it, so it took me a long time to do this review. So I decided that I'm going to unplug it and talk about it because some people have been asking me when they find out that I did make the upgrade. Hey dude, what's the difference? Well, to sum it up, the difference is that the Delta Sigma Gungnir, while it does give you very nice detail, it gives it in a package which I would not call natural. So what you're paying for in the upgrade is a more natural sound. Yes, it's a bit warmer, but it's a more natural sound. Acoustic guitars, pianos, very important, I forgot to mention that. Pianos, grand pianos, all these instruments sound more natural. They are separated extremely well. When you're listening to them on a very resolving pair of headphones, like the Utopia or the AC100, you will definitely hear a difference. And you will definitely think that, okay, there is something to this multibit meme, which some people think. Definitely. Do I hear a difference in the outputs when I'm using balanced or if I'm using unbalanced? I don't. I have tried them both. I don't hear a difference in sound quality when it comes to the balanced output of the Gumby and the unbalanced ones. I did read someone's blog once where they said they were using it with their speakers through the SE outputs. Then he switched to the balanced outputs and he found it to be several times better. I can't attest to that. So I'm glad, because that means I can use 3 outputs, which I've been using all 3 of these at the same time. These have you can basically plug in 3 different outputs to this, 2 SE, 1 balanced, and it will all run at the same time. So there's no switching or anything like that. You could have 3 amps playing at the same time, which I do have quite often if I want to A/B between them to hear how a headphone sounds from different sources at the same time. So very happy I made this upgrade. Thanks again to Mark for managing to do this upgrade, and I can see myself keeping this unless I get a randomly good price on the Yggdrasil. I don't think I'll be jumping up from this, because I think by many accounts, honestly, both the Yggdrasil and the Gumby are very, very high performers for their price. Now even the Yggdrasil is like $2,300 or something like that. Even for that range, considering how high the prices of DACs go, because DACs are very intricate technology, way beyond my understanding, and way above my pay grade, or whatever you want to call it, because they can get very expensive, all the way up to like DCS DACs, like the Vivaldi, which is like 35,000 pounds or something like that. This is a heavy hitter for the price. If you can get it for under $1,000, you are getting a very good deal, honestly, I have to say. And I know that statement would annoy so many people who, the whole DAC is transparent crowd, but that is my honest opinion. There is something to the sound of this which I do not hear with the Auto GD DAC, which I don't hear with any of the other DACs that I've tried, except all Delta Sigma DACs that I've tried, except for the Dave. I don't hear it with the Mojo, I don't hear it with the Hugo, and I don't hear it with the Hugo TT. So there's something special about this DAC. So once again, if you are going to get this DAC, it does seem like a knock against it, but please don't use the USB unless you have some kind of... I know there's some ways to make the USB input sound better. I do have a Schiit Weird, which I bought for review last year, but then I decided not to return it, because that seems a bit scummy to me to return it after a review. So I've held on to it, and I've used it with this. I've cleaned up the USB, whatever that means. But I still think that the SPDF input is better sounding, more lively, more punchy, definitely has more body to the sound than the slightly flatter USB input. That is my takeaway. My biggest takeaway, if you're going to buy this, is do try to use optical in or coaxial in, that kind of thing. And oh, by the way, I think I said it uses AES. I don't think it does. Never used AES, so sorry if that seems like misinformation. I'm gonna go plug this back in now and enjoy it some more. So thank you for going through my very long and winding review, and I will see you next time. Cheers.